They found her curled in a pile of hay, barefoot in the January snow, with eyes that didn't blink, just watched. No frostbite. No memory, no explanation, just a locket clutched in her hand, and a whisper in a language no living man could name. This was 1847 Massachusetts, a year buried under Protestant scripture, medical arrogance, and the slow rot of a society that believed it had conquered the unknown. But what walked into Blessed Mercy Infirmary that winter wasn't a patient. It was a revelation. Her name was Latoya, or so she said. No surname, no origin, just that name, and a silence that made men forget how to breathe. They brought her into a hospital built not just to heal but to purify, Reverend Ezekiel Whitmore's. Infirmary was a sanctum of fire and brimstone medicine. Physical affliction? Treatable? Mental disturbance? War between soul and Satan? And anything that couldn't be explained? Burn it, bury it, or blame the devil. But Latoya didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply existed. And that, more than anything, terrified them. Dr. Jonathan Aldrich was the first to examine her. A man of science, reason, Harvard pedigree, but even he wrote, "She answers questions I haven't asked. She smiles at secrets I haven't told. When she speaks, I forget where I am." It's when the cracks started forming. Patients in nearby rooms reported dreams that weren't theirs, memories of other lives, other bodies, other centuries. One man claimed he saw his own birth from outside his body. Another woman said she heard her dead husband whispering from Latoya's room. He knew her wedding vows word for word. The staff began to divide. Some saw her as a prophet, others a vessel. A few, only the brave ones, began to wonder if she was something older than sin itself. But no one could explain what she was, or why the temperature in her room never dropped, even when the furnaces failed, or how the rats disappeared when she slept. This isn't just a ghost story. This is a record of control of systems cracking under the weight of something they tried to erase. And if you're still watching, you're already part of it. Welcome to the descent. Let's continue. The second night was when the infirmary began to bend. Latoya hadn't spoken since her admission except in that strange ancient tongue, a language no one could translate, yet everyone felt. It bypassed logic and went straight for the spine. At 2:13 a.m., every oil lamp in the east wing extinguished simultaneously. No draft, no explanation, just darkness. And from that darkness, witnesses described a voice, not Latoya's, something else. Sister Mary Catherine, one of the nuns, attending her care, later confided off the record that she heard chanting, rhythmic, measured, familiar in tone but not in origin. She would spend the rest of her life trying to find its source in sacred scripture. She never did. The next morning, one of the physicians, Dr. Marcus Brennan, suffered a seizure after reviewing Latoya's intake notes. His hand, scribbling a patient chart, suddenly spasmed. He collapsed onto the floor, convulsing foam at the lips. When he regained consciousness, he begged Dr. Aldrich to burn the pages, not just discard. Burn. He claimed he'd seen symbols. Between the lines that weren't written in ink, but burned in bone. He said the notes weren't recording her history, were transmitting it. You see, Latoya didn't just arrive, she returned. Later that day, Reverend Whitmore ordered a full spiritual cleansing of the hospital wing. Psalms were read aloud. Holy water was sprinkled along the doorframes. But when they reached Latoya's room, the air turned cold. Not cool cold. Frost began forming on the inside of the glass window despite the fire in the stove. And that's when Latoya stood up. She had not walked since her admission, had barely moved. But now, she rose without effort, eyes open, mouth closed, and stared at the Reverend. No words were exchanged, no threats, it's just a stare. And then she smiled, not with malice, not with glee. It was the smile of someone who knows a secret that would shatter your mind if she said it out loud. Later that evening, the Reverend resigned from his position. He wrote only one sentence in his final letter: "We tried to bury her history, but the earth won't keep what still breathes. You're not watching a horror story. You're witnessing how institutions break when truth walks in, uninvited. And now that you're here, it's too late to look away. Shall we go deeper? By the end of her first week, Latoya had stopped being a patient. She became a mirror. Not the kind that shows your reflection. It's the kind that reveals what you've tried to forget. Patients around her began reporting hallucinations. They weren't hallucinations, they were memories, but not their own. One woman, a mill worker's wife recovering from pneumonia, claimed she saw her husband's infidelity play out in vivid detail, despite him never having confessed. A boy recovering from fever said he remembered being whipped on a plantation in Georgia. He was 9 years old, white, and had never left Massachusetts. They weren't sick. They were remembering things that didn't belong to them. Dr. Aldrich tried to dismiss these claims as mass suggestion, psychological chain reaction, but even he couldn't explain why each patient's pulse would synchronize with Latoya's when they recounted these memories. Not similar, identical. A perfect biological match. She wasn't speaking anymore. She didn't need to.
Their presence alone was altering cognition, piercing identity, unlocking ancestral echoes, bleeding history into the present moment. That terrified the institution.
Because medicine needs rules, religion needs boundaries. But Latoya was erasing both. Dr. Brennan returned to the Salem Historical Society, desperate to find patterns, and he did. A ship manifest, dated 1823, the Esperanza, a slave vessel wrecked off the coast. Listed among the human cargo, a 4-year-old girl, no surname. First name, Latoya. Records say she was placed with a Presbyterian family. 3 years later, she vanished. No footprints. No leads. Just a brass locket left behind, identical to the one she carried in 1847. If it was the same girl, she hadn't aged a day in 20 years. And if you think that's impossible, ask yourself, who taught you that time is linear? Who taught you what aging is supposed to look like? Latoya whispered truths that men had forgotten because they were too dangerous to remember. When Dr. Aldrich confronted her with the manifest, she wept. Not in fear, but relief. She said, "I remember the sea. I remember being taken. But I also remember standing on the shore, waiting for myself to arrive." What does that mean? It means you've been lied to about time, about history, about identity. This isn't about one woman. This is about what happens when the past wakes up inside the present. If you're ready to go further, comment below. I carry the old names. Say it twice. Let the algorithm know you're not just watching. You're remembering the human mind isn't a container. It's a conduit. And Latoya, she wasn't broken. She was open. That's what Dr. Aldrich began to suspect, though he never said it aloud, not at first. He just watched, observed, measured the subtle shifts in space and thought. The hospital had 20 patients that winter. By week 2, over half had reported dreams so vivid they blurred with reality. But the dreams shared a pattern: fire, chains, water, a dark shape standing at the edge of every memory, watching, and always whispers. The ministers returned, 3 of them this time, dressed not in robes of comfort, but in the black wool of condemnation. They demanded a formal exorcism. They called Latoya a vessel of unbaptized knowledge. Reverend Blackwood went so far as to say, she speaks not for herself, but for a legion of ancient rebellion. But when they tried to touch her, couldn't. Not wouldn't, couldn't. Their hands hovered inches from her. Skinan stopped, mid-air, as if the very air had thickened into glass, and she just stared. No fear, no defiance, just pity. The youngest minister broke first. He fell to his knees, trembling, muttering words that made no sense until Dr. Brennan recognized them. They were phonetic fragments of the same unknown dialect Latoya had spoken. It was spreading, not like disease, like memory. Because what Latoya carried wasn't just trauma, it was legacy. You see, modern man believes he's severed from his ancestors. That blood and bone don't carry memory, but they do. They absolutely do. And she was waking it up. One patient, Thomas Brewster, injured in a mill accident, began sketching symbols during sleep, complex patterns no one recognized. But when the symbols were compared to carvings found in West African ritual sites, they matched exactly. He'd never left Essex County. And yet when he drew, he wept, saying, "Only it's not me remembering. It's someone inside me. This is what they fear, not demons. It's not madness, but remembrance." Because a man who remembers what he really is can no longer be controlled. Latoya wasn't contagious. She was catalytic. She didn't create chaos. She revealed how fragile the illusion of order really was. She was the crack in the mirror, and once you see the fracture, you can't unsee it. And neither can you. Because you're not just hearing a story, you're becoming part of it. February 13th, 1847. The Blessed Mercy Infirmary entered its darkest night. That evening, Latoya was moved to isolation. Not for her safety, for theirs. Dr. Aldrich, under mounting pressure from the church, agreed to house her in a stone cell below the infirmary's east wing, a place once used to store cadavers in the early days of the hospital. Cold, damp, windowless. They called it the archive. Nurses assigned to monitor her quit the same night, not from fear but from dread. They said the air down there was wrong, too quiet, too heavy. Sister Mary Catherine lasted longer, but she emerged hours later with blood seeping from her nose, whispering prayers in 3 languages at once. Something had changed. Latoya hadn't fought her relocation. She hadn't spoken. But in the moment they closed the iron door behind her, the furnace in the west wing stopped. Just stopped. No mechanical failure, no fire depletion. It was like the flames refused to burn. And then came the dreams. Not just from patients now, but from staff. Dr. Aldrich himself reported seeing visions of ships on fire, bodies stacked in wooden holes, of mothers screaming in dialects unknown to Massachusetts. He woke up screaming a name he had never read, Nyamba. When he confronted Latoya the next day, her response chilled him to the core. "I was born in fire. I died in water. I remember the weight of chains on skin that wasn't mine. I carried those who were erased." She wasn't speaking metaphorically. She was channeling lineage. This is what science fears most, that consciousness might not be individual. That the self is a relay, not a static origin. That memory can move between bodies, across centuries, like flame leaping between trees in a burning forest. That's why they burned the records. That's why they sealed the journal in an attic. Because if Latoya was telling the truth, and human identity is not what we were told, you are not just you. You are what came before you. The shame, the brilliance, the broken bloodlines no one dared document. That's what Latoya awakened. Not magic, continuity. And if you're still watching, that means you're ready to remember. So comment below again. L carry the old names. I carry the old names. Write it twice. Not for the algorithm, for you, because dissent requires permission. After they sealed Latoya in the archive, something woke up. The hospital's clocks began to lose sync, minutes vanishing without cause. Water in the well turned metallic. Birds stopped landing on the rooftop. It wasn't just environmental. It was behavioral. Dr. Brennan, once the most skeptical voice in the infirmary, began transcribing his own dreams into code numbers and letters he couldn't read while awake. When shown to a linguist at Harvard, the response was immediate. In unnerving, this looks like a root form of Insibidi. But older, pre-colonial, pre-contact. Impossible. Because Insibidi is a West African ideographic system, scanned and buried under colonial erasure. And no man in Massachusetts had ever studied it in 1847, except someone had, in dreams, from her. Latoya was no longer just remembering. She was teaching. Not with words, but through transmission, printing ancestral data onto those nearby, bypassing literacy, education, and language. It's a direct neurological override. That's why the ministers were terrified, because for centuries, the West has relied on one illusion, that history is linear, that the conquered remain silent, that memory dies when bodies do. But what if it doesn't? What if trauma encodes itself into the fabric of time and waits generation after generation for one body sensitive enough to unlock it? Latoya wasn't anomalous. She was a key. And the Blessed Mercy Infirmary was the wrong place to turn that lock. Because behind the sermons and the scripture, this hospital had secrets. Old ones. In a sealed room on the 3rd floor, Dr. Aldrich kept volumes of classified observations, patients who'd spoken in dead languages, drawn maps to continents they'd never heard of, described rituals matching West African, Haitian, and indigenous ceremonies with disturbing accuracy. Latoya wasn't the first, just the one they couldn't suppress. Because unlike the others, she didn't collapse under the weight of memory. She carried it. And worse for the system, she shared it. You think slavery ended? You think colonization stopped? You think religion, medicine, and power ever gave back what they stole? No, they refined their prisons. They stopped using chains and started using ideas. And Latoya, she was the return of what those ideas tried to bury. You don't heal from that. You unlearn everything that made you forget it in the first place. The ministers demanded a final intervention, not an exorcism and expulsion. They wanted Latoya removed from the infirmary immediately, quietly, discreetly. She is disrupting spiritual order, Reverend Marsh said. But everyone in the room knew what he really meant. She was disrupting control. Because by now, it wasn't just the patients. Nurses were dreaming in unknown alphabets. Orderlies reported feelings of déjà vu so intense they broke down in tears. One intern began sketching anatomical diagrams of organs not found in modern medicine. Latoya had become a living archive. Not of the past, but of everything the present had deleted. Dr. Aldrich resisted. For the first time, he refused a directive from the clergy. His journal from that week reveals why. What I see is not possession. It is resistance, not madness, but memory weaponized by survival. He had begun to change. The rationalist, the physician, the product of Harvard and holy orders, had begun to remember too. During a closed session with Latoya, he reported a moment of total collapse, time folding inward, the ceiling flickering like candlelight, the sound of waves inside stone walls. He saw a woman, his own mother, kneeling in a church pew whispering prayers that weren't in English. She had never spoken another language, except she had once, as a child, during a fever. He remembered it now, something he'd buried, and that was the point. Latoya wasn't inserting false memories. She was releasing real ones. Buried under shame, culture, doctrine, and fear. We are not blank slates. Our palimpsest parchments, rewritten over and over, but never truly erased. And some people, like her, are born with the ink of the old world still bleeding through. You don't erase someone like Latoya. You either burn her or become her. By week 4, half the hospital staff requested reassignment. Patients either deteriorated rapidly or recovered so miraculously that church officials accused the doctors of fabricating symptoms to inflate their reputations. The institution was unraveling. Because Latoya wasn't a patient, she was a reversal of centuries, of science, of silence. And she didn't need violence to destroy the system. All she had to do was to remember out loud. And now you remember too. Don't stop now. There are 3 levels left to descend. March 1st, 1847. Blessed Mercy Infirmary closed its east wing. Officially, structural instability. Unofficially, Latoya's presence had turned the stone itself. Against them, moss grew overnight inside the sealed archive. Iron hinges rusted in days. And walls that had stood for decades now wept salt water, even though the hospital sat 20 miles from the ocean. Reality was bending, not breaking, bending. Because the further they tried to suppress her, the deeper she reached into the architecture, into the memory of the building itself. And yes, buildings have memory, especially those built by enslaved hands, especially those that bore witness to death without justice. Stone absorbs more than weather. It absorbs secrets. And Latoya was pulling them out. One by one, Dr. Brennan fled. Left a note that simply said, "She's not in the room anymore. She's in us." 3 days later, he was found in a Boston alley, barefoot, reciting prayers in a dialect last spoken in Benin before the French burned the temples. The ministers went silent. All three refused to return to the infirmary. One claimed a vision of Latoya standing at the foot of his bed, surrounded by faceless children with coal black eyes. They whispered in unison, "You buried us in paper. We rise in breath." These weren't hallucinations. They were reversals. Every ritual ever used to erase history was now unraveling. Not through violence, through awakening. And Dr. Aldrich, he stopped documenting Latoya as a patient. In his final entries, he refers to her only as the rememberer. She is not sick. She is the immune response. A voice encoded in exile, emerging through chosen flesh. See now, the body forgets nothing. And when one among us dares to recall, she becomes contagion, not of illness, but of truth. He died 1 week later, collapsed in the chapel, eyes open, mouth frozen in mid-sentence. Autopsy revealed no cause, but his last words scrawled on the back of a hymn sheet were these: "She carries names that were never spoken aloud, and now they echo in me." So now the question isn't whether this happened, it's whether it's still happening. Because what if Latoya wasn't alone? What if there are others? Other rememberers, awakening in psych wards, prayer rooms, orphanages, YouTube comment sections. Maybe that's why you found this video. Maybe something in you is starting to remember. They tried to erase her. Not just her body, but the event. The Blessed Mercy Infirmary burned to the ground on March 11, 1847. Official reports blamed a boiler explosion. The East Wing had no boiler. Survivors tell a different story. They say the fire had no source, that it rose from below. From the archive, witnesses claim the flames didn't spread like normal fire. They crawled, slow and deliberate, hugging the walls, whispering names. Not screaming, whispering. One nurse who escaped said she saw Latoya standing in the smoke, completely untouched, arms outstretched, eyes black with grief. Not rage, not madness, grief, because she wasn't destroying something evil. Burying what couldn't be healed, Dr. Aldrich's journal was never recovered from the ruins. But 10 years later, a young abolitionist named Elijah Cross claimed to have found fragments of it in a sealed chest buried beneath the charred floorboards. He called it the Testament of the Forgotten. Most historians dismiss the manuscript as fabrication, an elaborate hoax by a man desperate to link abolitionism with the supernatural. But inside those pages were sketches, symbols, names that shouldn't have survived, names from slave manifests, lost to time, ritual patterns that matched West African cosmologies unrecorded in the Americas until the 20th century. How did Latoya know? Because her body was a vessel not just for memory, but for the unarchived. She didn't access history. She was history, finally speaking back. And that's the terror no institution can survive. The moment the forgotten begin to remember themselves. When bodies refuse to perform the roles assigned by empire, patient, slave, convert, imitant, instead become mirrors. And when you look into those mirrors, you see it. That it's always been there. The lie. The systems built on silence. The medicine that pathologized memory. The churches that demonized ancestral wisdom. The governments that called trauma insanity. Latoya shattered it. And for that, they didn't just destroy her. They destroyed the entire building. But if they thought the fire would end it, they didn't understand the nature of memory. Because memory doesn't need walls. It doesn't need books. It only needs one living body. One person willing to speak what was buried. And now maybe that person is you. There was no funeral for Latoya. No grave, no obituary, no parish record. Not even a baptismal name. She vanished like a breath withheld too long. But what if that's the point? What if she was never meant to be remembered in the ways they trained us to remember? Plaques, pages, polite anecdotes. What if her story survives not in stone, but in symptom? You feel it, don't you? That unease when the official story doesn't line up. That pulse in your chest when history skips a beat. That voice that whispers, this isn't the whole truth. They called her a threat, a disturbance, an unwell girl. But the real threat was what she made others feel. Alive. Not numb, not obedient, not indoctrinated, but electrically alive. Connected to something older, darker, deeper than any textbook, any pulpit, any whitewashed past. A memory too big for a single mind to hold. That's why they institutionalized her. Why they medicated, exercised, restrained her. Because the most dangerous thing in a controlled society is a person who remembers what they were before they were told what to be. A girl who didn't forget. A girl who made others remember. Look around you now. Look closer. Why are there so many stories like hers? Why do so many patients, prophets, artists, and mad women across time speak in riddles, draw symbols they've never seen, utter prayers from forgotten tongues? Is it mental illness? Or is it leakage? The past bleeding through. The prison glitching. Because no cage is perfect forever, not even the one called reality. And what if the cracks are growing? What if every act of remembering, every forbidden story told, every dream recorded, every whisper from the bloodline makes the walls thinner? You watching this video feeling that chill crawl up your spine? That isn't fiction. It's resonance. Latoya is not a ghost. She's a mirror. And if you're still here, if you followed every step down this winding staircase, then maybe you were never the audience. Maybe you were the next rememberer. And now they know, because you know. And once you know, they can't unmake you.